This is On Target St. John's, a look at politics, crime, education. What's happening here with the people who know. The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station. Now, your On Target St. John's host, Linda Swain.
And good afternoon, everyone. Well, the sun is shining, and that will put a bit of a spring in your step every time, guaranteed. To say that the COVID situation is wearing on people would be a bit of an understatement. And it's becoming clear that while the situation is improving, COVID is something we'll be living with for some time to come. Well, what kind of an impact is the pandemic having on our psychological health? Well, here to discuss that is past president of the Association of Psychology Newfoundland and Labrador, Dr. Janine Hubbard. Hello.
Linda, believe it or not, I'm back as president again.
No, you are.
I just can't get enough of it. But
delete the past. There it goes. Gone. You are now president. Wow, this feels like a weird COVID reunion for you and I.
It does. Man, I miss being in studio. But yes, this is, it has been a long haul, hasn't it?
It really has. And, you know, no guarantee that things will go back exactly to normal in the foreseeable future. But how are you doing in the meantime?
Well, we're hanging in, and I don't think, no, and I mean, the reality is anytime we experience a life-altering event, life never goes back completely to normal, whether it's a good thing, bad thing, whatever. We will definitely have long-term, there will be some positive impacts that will come out of this. I'm hoping that, you know, come the fall, we'll all put on masks if we're having cold symptoms, and our high-end hygiene is going to be a little bit more thoughtful, and we need to figure out something different to do other than blowing out candles on the birthday cake. There are a few things that this has taught us that we're kind of thinking about, and we may see some changes that aren't a bad thing. But we do worry about some of the mental health aspects that are lingering and unfortunately are probably going to continue to linger.
For certain, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But in terms of your practice and that of your colleagues, are you playing a lot of catch-up right now?
We have never been busier. Now, again, as a profession, we were really lucky that we were able to, I hate the word pivot, but there is no better word for it, and most of us learned how to provide therapy online, which at the beginning of the pandemic, I'd never done teletherapy, wanted nothing to do with it, thought, how on earth can I see kids over a computer? It has been the best thing in terms of practice, in terms of accessibility, in terms of convenience for people. It's not the same as in person. There's no question there are a number of dynamics that are different. But given a choice between sitting and talking behind masks and, distances and all of that kind of thing versus talking on a screen at a time that's convenient for families, it has been life-altering. And I think that's something that is going to continue as part of our practice long-term. And it means we've been able to open up to the entire province.
For certain. I mean, it has.
And remote families are able to access services that they never could before.
This movement towards more virtual type of, connections or meetings has really opened things up in a lot of ways. And you've previously pointed that out as well. It's made, actually, in many cases, has made healthcare more accessible for some people.
It really has. And again, I think that's going to be one of those long-term changes that you start to see within the healthcare system in general. Not everything will be done virtually, but not everything has to be done in person. And I think that's maybe one of the big learning lessons we've had. And that especially in a province like Newfoundland and Labrador, not having to do as much of the travel, not having to do the parking, not having, all of those things. Has really opened things up. As I said, it's not the same. It doesn't feel the same, but there's some really impressive research that has come out that says the effectiveness of therapy via telehealth as opposed to in person is actually pretty similar. So we've got the evidence saying that, even though we all felt very uncomfortable at first, the efficacy, the end result that we're seeing from it is actually quite similar to in person.
It's quite amazing, actually, but there are some, fallbacks from it, not the least of which is getting to see the way people live. And there might be a little bit of competition that happens in those regards, everybody looking for that perfect backdrop to show just how, cultured and wonderful they are, or whatever the case may be.
I just like meeting everybody's pets.
Yeah, that for sure.
And honestly, I've met the iguanas, I've met the snakes, I've met the fish. I've had, lots of cats and dogs make appearances, and it's been really helpful actually on a rapport building side of things. And there have been times when I've been working from home. So again, clients are, discovering a few aspects of my life. They're meeting my dog, and it humanizes things in a different way.
For sure. But is it harder to communicate with somebody on a screen? Do you pick up those same subtle cues that you would face-to-face with somebody when they're shifting in their chair or crossing their legs or whatever the case may be? Because there's so many ways to communicate, as we all know.
There are. Certainly there's a big difference between phone and having that screen. No question. That makes the biggest difference. It's not the same, but it is also interesting in the number of people who have talked about feeling more comfortable and able to open up because they're in their own space. They're in the space where they feel comfortable. Or sometimes in the case of kids, I've had parents tell me, yep, what you're seeing is the candid behavior. This is what they're like at home. Whereas in my office, sometimes they're either on their very best behavior or because it's a new and strange environment, they're climbing the furniture and they're behaving in ways that isn't typical for them. So although there were originally a lot of people who were very reluctant, like I say, including myself as a clinician, but a lot of clients were very reluctant to try the teletherapy. Once they gave it a try, most people have been really pleasantly pleased with it. I mean, obviously there are issues around technology, there are issues around privacy. Not everybody is in a setup where they can speak candidly and privately in their home environment. And, there are lots of bugs that we've had to work out in different ways. But it's even meant I've done sessions with people sitting in their cars in the driveway, which, if that's what works for them, we've made it work.
My guest today on Target is President of the Association of Psychology Newfoundland and Labrador, Dr. Janine Hubbard. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
My guest today is psychologist and president of the Association of Psychology Newfoundland and Labrador, Dr. Janine Hubbard, and we're talking a little bit about COVID and the impacts of COVID on our psychology. Things are starting to open up, Janine. It's easier to feel optimistic when the sun is shining out there. Are people feeling more hopeful now?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. I think at the moment we have people at a whole variety of stages of readiness. We have people who have already booked their flights and are greeting visitors. We have some that are kind of cautiously moving forward, and we have some people who are really still experiencing some debilitating mental health issues as a result of the pandemic and are terrified of moving forward. So we've got the full spectrum happening right at the moment.
The New York Times calls it languishing.
Well, it was a wonderful article because I think it described, we've talked about COVID fatigue. We've talked about, we know, our adrenal systems have taken a beating the last 16 months. We are well equipped to cope with short-term stress, but when our bodies are faced with long-term chronic stress, it has an impact. It has an impact on us physically. It has an impact on our sleep, and it definitely has an impact on our mental health. And as things stretched on and on, people, kind of really started to get fatigued. And then what surprised people is as things sounded more optimistic, as we were having the rollout of the vaccines, there were a lot of people, and I've had this discussion, and I can say I was feeling it myself, who sort of said, why am I not more excited? Why am I not feeling more optimistic about this? And why am I kind of struggling so much? And like I say, this was it's not a psychological term by any means, but this was the term that this author coined, was the idea that we're languishing. So, I'm not depressed, I'm not burnt out, but I'm sure not functioning at full capacity. You're having more difficulty with focus and concentration. Your motivation to do things, especially, at work, it's just not at full capacity. My other non-scientific term for it is everybody's feeling a little meh. They're trying. And like I say, it's not full-blown depression by any means, but we do worry that if people stay in that state for a prolonged period of time and just that feeling apathetic, it's kind of like you're just kind of treading your way through mud to get through each day. And you're existing and you're getting through the day, but you're sure not thriving. And that's kind of that concept of languishing. And that has resonated with a lot of people as to how they were feeling this spring. Linda, I don't know about yourself. Or some of the conversations you've had with your colleagues, but I know it resonated with a lot of people in my life.
I know also that, with change, generally speaking, we don't like to change. We're open to change sometimes, or if it's foisted upon us, we'll change. But then we're not really that eager to change back. What I'm hearing from a lot of people, and I know I've felt it myself at various times through this pandemic, is, you know what, I kind of like working from home. You know what, I kind of like not having to get up at a certain hour, get dressed, shower, slap the paint on my face, and, head out the door at a particular time and get in traffic. All of those workaday transitions in the course of your day, I'm hearing from more and more people that kind of liked working from home. So now when the regulations started lifting a little bit and Dr. Fitzgerald said, you can start, working from the workplace again, I know I could feel that sort of collective from a number of people out there.
Oh, for sure. Well, there's a few things, kind of like the advantages that I discussed with the telehealth. The whole concept that we can actually be, for a lot of people, very productive working from home, and it increases a lot of quality of life aspects. A lot of people were eating much better because they were actually taking the time to go and properly prepare some food. They were taking a break at lunch and going out and walking the dog.
Or eating a lot.
Well, there's that too. But, it was throwing a load of laundry before you sit down and work on a project. There were a lot of people who have realized that some of that quality of life aspect has come along, and a lot of managers have realized, actually, my employees can be very productive that way. And I'm really thinking, kind of like some of those other societal shifts that we saw, that we may see more of an openness. People may not be full-time at home, but perhaps there's more of a transition where it's accepted that you go into the office a couple of days a week, or you come in and do the stuff that needs in person, but then maybe your afternoons are spent working at home. I think we're going to see an appreciation for there have been some advantages. As I said, I think telehealth is here to stay. I think we're going to see some of that in terms of some of realizing the quality of life that can come from working at home. There's also a whole lot of statistics coming out about people just not going back to their old jobs because they've realized either that they were very unhappy in that position or that they've really enjoyed the freedom and flexibility of, kind of a different home life balance, and they're looking around at other options. So I think we may see some interesting changes there.
Do you think there is a certain aspect of society that really appreciated that little bit of a slowdown?
Oh, I think on one hand, we all did, and I really hope that we can. I'm not optimistic we'll remember it, but even the early days, the beginning of the shutdown, the number of kids who said, you know what, I really like the fact that mom and dad were at home and we played board games. We slowed down. Listen, how nice was it Christmas not to have, 6 places you needed to be every evening for the holiday season and running yourself ragged, being able to appreciate a little bit more the things that were important. Now, don't get me wrong. It would have been nice to have more family and more contacts and that piece of things. But I think some of that, certainly I think a lot of us appreciated the maybe we were shopping for the sake of shopping, and maybe we didn't need to be doing quite so much of that kind of stuff, although a lot of people picked up some online shopping habits. But I really hope we remember, because I also know that our collective memories are very short, and it's very easy to go back to the default, of the not having a great home-work-life balance.
What about the impact on kids, especially school-age kids in particular? Because I know that schools, not only do they teach your child, but they also provide all kinds, a whole cascade of other kinds of supports. And teachers and educators start to get a little nervous when kids go off the radar, because they see them in the classroom, they can monitor them, they know what's happening, they know when they're having their good days, they know when they're having their bad days, they know when they're going through a period of some strife. When they go off the radar, that becomes worrisome. And I have been talking to teachers who have said, we've been really worried about certain kids that just sort of disappeared.
Yeah. And again, I could talk for the whole hour about the worries that I have about our kids at the moment. Again, most of them are going to get through this relatively unscathed, and they're going to be okay. So that's the big message I want to give. But certainly a lot of them are going to have some struggles for the next little while, and some adjustment bumps is, I guess, the way I want to describe it. The at-home learning, again, we fortunately did not experience it to the extent that a lot of the rest of the country did. But again, it was an interesting experiment because there were some kids who thrived, who it really pulled to their strengths. It let them excel in all kinds of interesting ways. And there are other kids for whom it was a disaster. Again, we can talk lots more about that. But so we have some kids who, have been able to keep up academically. We have some kids who have some real gaps. We have some previously capable kids who just could not handle the structure. We've also heard that about some of the post-secondary students of trying to do the online piece. It was fascinating. When we came back from the first lockdown, the number of families that contacted me regarding concerns about either ADHD or learning issues in their kids because they had been home with them and witnessing it firsthand. So it certainly increased in awareness, or people were able to sort of see where some of those struggles were arising. And I'm not sure where we're at for a break, but there are a lot of developmental things that our kids have missed that we're going to need to do some active work on. A lot of it having to do with socializing, because even when kids were in school this year, they didn't have a normal social experience. They were restricted to their desks. They weren't having the lunch breaks. They weren't hanging out in front of the lockers. And even if they were doing extracurricular activities, they weren't doing the informal, casual social piece that went along with it. So there are a lot of social gaps and issues that we're going to want to address.
And even, playing with kids of different age groups because they were sticking to their cohort. So it was your classroom and that was it. And, you do tend to learn things from the younger children by, being sort of a mentor to them. And you learn things from the older kids who are setting examples. So I found that in the last year or so, that's really been lacking in the child development sort of stage.
Oh, there's so many areas. I mean, I'm worried about our preschool kids who, again, haven't had that informal. Some of them have, but even the kids who've been in daycare, again, what they've been able to do has been more limited. But just some of those social interactions, that learning to share, that learning to take turns, some of those skills, are certainly lacking. The junior high kids got really hit with some of the social deficits because it was often new school, new peer group, and then not the opportunities to do some of the socializing.
And such a painfully awkward time in your life.
The best of times. And then I'm seeing interesting little gaps. And again, this is why I'm saying they're blips and they can be addressed. We know kids these days don't use cash as much as, you or I would have growing up. They're more likely to take their debit card down to the corner store. But the culmination over this past year of everything going cashless, plus kids not casually going into the corner store to get their ice cream, mean I've been doing a bunch of assessments recently. Kids don't know currency. They don't know coins. They don't know the bills because they haven't been exposed to them in like a year and a half. So that's just one little knowledge gap that normally gets picked up through life experiences, but because those life experiences have looked different. So again, if you have kids kind of in the elementary school age area, make sure they know what currency is. Send them to the store to go and buy milk and give them cash, and start working, because that's a little remedial skill that a lot of them have missed out on.
Well, let me tell you something. Clocks are a mystery to a lot of kids these days, too. My guest today on Target is psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard, and I do want to explore that a little bit more about some of the impacts on kids over the last year and a half when we come back right after the break.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
We're back. My guest today is Dr. Janine Hubbard, and we've been talking about adjusting to COVID and I guess what we're going to be doing over the next little while. We were talking a little bit about the impact on kids, and you mentioned interestingly that because last year in particular, but again for a brief period this year, kids had to move to online learning, and so that allowed parents to see how they do learn, and it raised a few alarm bells for some parents, noticing that, hey, I've noticed some behavioral problems or some developmental problems here, or the possibility of a learning disability or ADHD. Are you seeing more of those types of diagnoses as a result?
Well, I think it's maybe been identified a little bit earlier, or it's been parents saying, oh, I get what the teachers were explaining now, or I've seen how challenging it is for my child to try to do some of this work. So, we've certainly seen some of that. And I think one of the biggest things we've seen with the older kids is that some of them have been able to work independently really well, and others have just really, really struggled with that piece.
That whole idea of languishing again.
Yep.
Some kids really thrive on structure. When the structure is gone, they drift.
Well, and the other thing is, we've got a few things. We need to remember that there are a lot of kids for whom, school is the safest, most secure place in their life, and that created a lot of issues. But particularly for some of the older kids, their reason for going to school has nothing to do with the academics. It's the extracurriculars, it's the social piece, it's the leadership, it's the all of those other intangibles that happen at school. And so when it was just boiled down to sit in your bedroom in front of a computer, that became a whole lot more challenging for a lot of kids. What we saw, or what we've seen, at least nationally, unfortunately, we've seen a significant increase in rates of depression and anxiety in kids and teens. And one of the other things that we've seen is a significant increase in the number of eating disorders. And at first I, kind of wondered about some of that, but we have taken away a lot of the coping supports that kids are used to having, whether it's their friends, whether, like I say, it's the extracurricular, whether it's the, the importance of exercise and fresh air and all of those things that go along with it. We definitely have seen some real increases in mental health concerns in our young people, and we're really worried about them.
And let's be clear, the tone on social media in the last little while has become increasingly toxic, or so it seems from, a casual observer type of. I know I've had periods where I've had said to myself, that's it, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. The level of toxicity out there is just so high, and I suppose we're all feeling it. We're all feeling ramped up.
People
but when
are
you
irritated. Yeah, again, when you're tired, you're grouchy, you're irritable. We've seen previously very tolerant people kind of start to lose patience again early on with the why aren't my neighbors following the rules? Why I'm being so strict about following all the public health rules, and look at what my neighbors are off doing. And in the
or
past,
what I think my neighbors are off doing.
That, yes, for sure. And just even starting to have, that decreased tolerance for differences of opinions from others. Again, we are weary, we are tired, and that, that lack of patience starts to show.
I mean, I'm old enough and ugly enough, as the old Newfoundland saying goes, to be able to put that into some perspective. But if I was 12 and all of a sudden all of my socializing has shifted to an online realm, how does my little 12-year-old mind process all of that and decipher what's good, what's bad, and how I'm being impacted by it?
Well, and it depends on who you are. I dealt with a lot of teenagers during the most recent lockdown from the local high school. And the number of 14 and 15-year-olds who were like, you mean I have to go live in the basement for the next 2 weeks and play video games and you'll bring me food? Awesome. And I can socialize with my friends over the video games because that's how I'm used to socializing with them. But then we had kids who experienced either becoming ill themselves or, far more concerning in a lot of cases, bringing it home and spreading it to families, spreading it to parents, and spreading it to grandparents. And the guilt or that fear of potentially, harming a loved one hit a lot of kids really hard.
And not to mention the kids who have had the finger pointing at them because mom or dad has been going back and forth somewhere, and all of a sudden somebody has decided that they were the cause of an outbreak.
Yeah. One of our unique circumstances here has certainly been the rotational workers and the stress that this has put on the families of rotational workers. And again, kids get it, and that's one of the messages I've been trying to preach this whole year is patience and tolerance for others, but also nobody tries to get COVID. Nobody sets out to go and do it. We don't want to wish that on anybody. And so trying, especially with, kids, to reduce some of the stigma, and I think in some ways the spread in town may have helped a little bit because it was so widespread, and the kids were doing what they had been told that they were allowed to do, like the sports teams getting together. Yes, there may have been other things that weren't supposed to be happening, but, which happened. But in a lot of cases, they were following the rules, they were following the advice, and it still happened. So kind of trying to reconcile that for a lot of people.
Now, the good news is that a lot of people, and I've already had some examples in my own family, people are coming home for the first time in a long time. They're finally going to see Nan. They're finally going to see their sisters and brothers. They're going to bring their kids, some of them kids that didn't even exist when this when this struck. So there's that renewed sense of optimism with people reuniting with loved ones.
There is, which is amazing and wonderful, and I'm beyond thrilled, and I love the scenes at the airport, seeing the hugs and seeing the excitement. I give a couple of cautions. One of them is it's really important to talk to people about boundaries in terms of what they're comfortable with. We have actually, relatively speaking, been very lucky here in the province, and in many ways, compared to the rest of Canada, we have lived a relatively normal life compared to some of our counterparts. So remembering that, for example, I have family in Ontario who have not set foot in a store in 16 months, who, have not hugged anyone outside of that immediate family, even though they know it's safe now. The level of isolation that they're coming out of compared to what we have dealt with means it's going to be really important when that family arrives to set boundaries in terms of what are you comfortable with? Hope there are some people who are just going to go arms in, all open, but there are some who are going to be a little bit more reluctant, whether it's in terms of some of the physical contact. The other thing that I always like to tell people, well, two things. remember that socializing is as lovely as it is, it's really tiring. And we have a lot of people who have not had as much socializing in the last 16 months as they're used to, especially if there's someone who's been, living alone or working from home this whole time. So while it's lovely to have company, everybody needs a bit of a break. Everybody needs to go to their own corners and have a nap or read a book or just respect hey, I need a bit of a timeout because I'm a little over-socialized right now. And then the other caveat that I give is it's wonderful to see people, but remember, they're still your family, they're still your friends. The same advice we've talked about before around Christmas time. Check your expectations. You've been dying to see them. It's been so exciting, and they're finally here. But they're still going to annoy you in some ways. They're still going to have all those behaviors that, the kids are not going to be perfect. They're going to be grouchy and irritable and not on their best behavior. And we need to remember that's part and parcel of all of this. And it's going to be a real adjustment period. But please celebrate those reunions. And one of the other things that can help with some of that is figuring out if there are rituals, things that are really important to people. For me, I'm a hugger. I cannot wait to be able to hug some members of my family. That, for me, is going to be the significant piece. It's interesting. My mother just can't wait to be able to set out the good china and silverware and set a proper dinner table inside, not, having people eat separately out in the backyard, socially distanced. So everybody's going to have their little ritual that kind of signifies okay, this is starting to feel a little bit more normal.
You were mentioning boundaries, and it struck me that, while Nan might be okay with you slobbering all over her, maybe her caretaker might not feel as comfortable with that, if you know what I'm saying. So we all have to be somewhat aware of those kinds of dynamics.
And we have to be very careful in terms of our messaging that, we still have all of our kids under 12 who are not yet vaccinated. And being mindful that there are a lot of parents who are very cautious about reopenings. And, I'm hearing from some of the other provinces where they're doing things like lifting the mask mandates. And the families are going, that's fine, but if you're around my family, you're wearing a mask because I have kids who are under 12. And so it's really important to be having those discussions. I haven't even started to contemplate the whole, how do you have a discussion about people who have who have chosen not to be vaccinated and how that gets disclosed or not disclosed and choices that will be made around that. I think that's going to be a big, big issue come the fall.
Oh, for sure, because not everyone's reasons for not getting vaccinated are political. Some of them are very personal, and some of them are health related. So we have to be open to some of those scenarios as well, while at the same time, being aware of our own health concerns, I suppose. Yeah, it's a difficult one to tightrope walk for sure.
So I think there's going to be some more tangly things. I think, like I say, come the fall with some reduced restrictions around that part's going to be tangly. And again, I think that's where it comes down to the importance of having candid discussions, figuring out what your own personal boundaries are, what you feel comfortable about, and then as best you can, I come back to my message I've given before, is the focus on the things that are within your control. And what your neighbors are doing, what other people in the store may be doing, those are out of your control. So focus on the what am I doing that makes myself feel safe, that makes myself feel comfortable, that works within my own boundaries and my own limits.
For certain.
And that's hard. That's easy for me to say. That's hard to follow.
And of course, once the mask restrictions are lifted, and it's lifted in an awful lot of jurisdictions now in Canada, but once the mask restrictions are lifted here, I know there's an awful lot of people, myself included, who are going to be like, you know what? I think I'm going to put my mask on.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that we will start to accept that that's okay. In healthcare, we've done that for years. You show up at work with a little bit of a sniffle. Well, you put on a mask just as protection for others. as a courtesy, not because you're deathly ill, but just as a basic courtesy. I think I'm hoping actually that may become far more the norm. That's certainly the norm in many other parts of the world, in terms of a cultural expectation that, if you're feeling unwell, you wear a mask.
That might cause problems in future, too, if that becomes part of the social courtesy. Oh, listen to him coughing over there and he haven't got no mask on,
Oh, I know. Again, we have all become so sensitized to, I sneezed. I coughed.
How many times do I hear somebody sneeze or cough and say, it's okay, it's okay.
I do it myself.
I have allergies.
And depending on what happens this fall in terms of cold and flu season, that being said, how many people celebrated the fact that they haven't had a cold in over a year?
Amen.
So maybe, you know what, I don't care what anybody else thinks. If that's going to help me prevent, my typical fall cold, well, then that's just what I'm going to do.
My guest today on Target, because we're overdue for a break, Dave is going to he's going to cough all over me or something. My guest today is psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
My guest today is psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard, and we're talking about, the impacts of COVID now that things feel like they're getting better somewhat, but it has had an impact. Are there any stats on mental health rates since the pandemic began?
Oh, there's lots of research studies out there looking at, a variety of things, but certainly the sobering facts are certainly things like suicidal ideation, so thoughts of suicide, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. Those have all been reported as very high, much higher than we expect. Again, that has varied a little bit from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, depending on, kind of the degree of the lockdown, the degree of the restrictions, and, of course, the degree of severity of the COVID infections, because we know that either having had COVID yourself or having a close family member have it or losing a family member to COVID obviously has, that much more of a significant impact. And again, we know that healthcare workers are another group that we're quite concerned about in terms of some of those stats. But interesting, there's some interesting research kind of looking at past traumatic events, or obviously we can't quite compare anything to this, but the current suggestions are that most of us are going to adapt. We're going to readjust. We're going to get out of this just fine. A few blips, a few anxious moments, hopefully a few changed habits, but that about 20% of the population may struggle at least over this next year in terms of readjusting. And to give you, an idea, normally those are lifetime stats. We talk about 1 in 5 people in their lifetime having a mental health concern. And what we're suggesting is over the next year, probably 1 in 5 having some degree of struggle. So I think it's going to be really important to have a lot of compassion for your friends and family and loved ones. We know the system is already overburdened in terms of mental health needs, so we're doing a lot of advocacy to make sure that the supports are out there and available for people. And best thing I would say is if you're continuing to struggle, reach out early. Don't let it get to a point where it's feeling like a crisis.
Are there enough resources out there to handle the demand, either now or into the future?
Well, we'll make it happen. We will make sure, because again, are there resources to at least address some short-term needs for people? Yes. Are there enough resources to address the long-term mental health needs? No. That is an ongoing struggle. That's something that is an association we're meeting with government and talking to them about, and we're trying to figure out ways and strategies because we know that those needs are there, and we know the cost that it has on society if it's not treated.
And for those who, just need to be more mindful, I suppose, of their mental health, there's still lots you can do that don't involve, I suppose, the healthcare system. Just finding those moments to yourself and I guess
self-care.
Practicing the things you love.
Well, and going back to the real basics of the importance of sleep, the importance of exercise, the importance of balanced eating, don't underestimate, and the importance of social support and, taking time for yourself, not working, and again, this is easier said than done, but working on that work-life balance. I think one of the things we started to appreciate were some of the smaller things, being able to sit and drink your coffee on the patio and have a few minutes just to yourself to recharge. So it doesn't have to be big fancy spa day, and it doesn't have to be, hours of therapy, and it doesn't have to be hours of yoga. It can literally be taking 5 minutes to yourself, having a cup of tea, and just kind of sitting and being and, trying to take a couple of deep breaths, be a little mindful, and then going on with your day.
Now, it kind of, maybe it's going to be different, but we have just 2 minutes or so left. Any final thoughts?
We've been through a collective trauma. And as a society, it has changed all of us. There's no question. Some of us have had situations where we've been able to cope with it better than others. Some have had life circumstances where we've been more affected by it than others. I think being tolerant and patient with each other, understanding that this isn't going to go away instantly. We're going to experience long-term effects from it, and making sure the importance of reaching out and social connectedness. I think that social piece, first and foremost, is probably the biggest thing we learned this past year.
And knowing who, I suppose, is more vulnerable than others and finding out how people are doing?
Yep. Listen, we started the year with Snowmageddon and the importance of reaching out to our vulnerable neighbors. Let's keep up that pattern. That's one of the things we're good at here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I know we're feeling stretched just in terms of our emotional resources, financial resources, you name it. But this is the time to, again, check in on the people around you who might be having more difficulty.
And get outside.
Yes.
That's the one that gets me every time, boy. You get outside, you smell those flowers, the grass, the trees, even if it's just sitting on your deck or on your driveway or on the sidewalk, it makes a difference.
Oh, for sure. And we've been cooped up for a long time. So even on the rainy days, sit in front of an open window, but get some fresh air. Embrace the things that are special about this place, and enjoy the enjoy the new grandbabies, enjoy seeing family and friends, enjoy being brave. And I was saying to Dave before I came on, I took baby steps and I went to the movies. Take those baby steps and celebrate hey, that was scary and new for me, but actually I got through it and it was kind of fun, so I'll make sure I do it again. But do it at your own pace, whatever is comfortable for you, and don't judge others if their pace is faster or slower than yours.
Dr. Janine Hubbard, a pleasure as always. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Linda.
And we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to row your boat, talking about the regatta. So stay tuned for that. Thanks.